Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Friday Food Fight. My name is Wes Christian, CEO of Food Handler Solutions, and we are joined once again by Bart Christian, nationally recognized speaker, and a very special guest, and an awesome topic for this week that could not be more appropriate for the times that we are going through right now. Without further ado, Bart, why don't you introduce our guest for this week and tell us a little bit about the topic we're going to be discussing.
Wes, I'm so excited to be able to introduce my really dear friend, Dr. Erika Goodwin. And you know, Erica is one of those people that you meet, and she's just one of the nicest, most passionate people that you ever want to meet. And then you get a bio from somebody like this, you realize, wow, this is a very impressive individual, not just besides being a sweetheart. And Erica, I know that you're the CEO of Goodwin Wellness Enterprises and Goodwin Medical Associates. You're a board certified child and adolescent and adult psychiatrist, also a best-selling author, also a speaker, also a life coach. I know you have a lot of passion for a variety of things, but primarily improving mental wellness in others, making people feel loved, which you've always made me feel when I'm around you, making people feel cared for, make sure that people understand how to be seen, and helping people to see the very best in themselves. I just, what got you into this? What got you into this industry, and what keeps you in? I guess because I noticed one of the books you wrote was thinking about quitting medicine. So I guess you've got an insight into why you do what you do.
Well, the funny thing is that you mentioned that sometimes that book comes up, sometimes it doesn't, partially because the person, it's an anthology, and the person that came up with the title was looking for something that was an attention grab. So it's a great conversation starter, but a tad misleading sometimes. So the story of how I even got into this, it kind of cracks me up. I was a really sick little kid. I had asthma really bad, was in and out of the hospital, in the ER all the time. And I spent a lot of time with my pediatrician. So by the time I was 3, I decided I was going to be a pediatrician. So I'm I'm going to be a pediatrician thing. Made it all the way into med school. And where I went to school, you didn't really start your clinical work until your 3rd year. Well, the summer before I actually did clinical work, I literally just woke up with this epiphany that I was going to be a child psychiatrist. I had not a single reason why. I guess God just decided I was going to be a child psychiatrist. And I decided, well, when I usually do what my gut tells me, it doesn't steer me wrong. And I was like, well, it's been over 20 years of wanting to be a pediatrician. If I want to do this for at least 20 years, I'll be good. So then I later came up with reasons, but the original was just an epiphany. I literally had not a single reason. And one of the things that keeps me here is naturally with the reasons I came up with after I had the epiphany was that the beauty of being a psychiatrist and working in mental health and mental wellness is it allows me to literally get paid for what feels like community service. And I get a chance to really affect the quality of life of so many people. So I remember when I was a little younger and I was doing research that you'd be in the lab and you felt like it'd be 10, 15 years till you saw any benefit or any change from what you actually did. And the beauty of what I do now is I get immediate gratification of getting to be able to really affect people. But it's a medical specialty that you still get to really know people. And I love that it's also an art and there's something spiritual about it. So I think what keeps me there is it feels like I'm working through with my soul's mission. And it's fun.
Well, so I have a quick question for you. So in your practice, with working with children primarily, how has what's been going on with the pandemic and COVID-19 affected children from your perspective and what you've seen?
Well, there's so many layers, and I'm so glad that you all decided to have me come on. And I feel like we could probably do this show in like 5 episodes because it's literally so much going on when you unpack everything. But one of the biggest things is, number one, just as adults have dealt with losses and change due to COVID-19, so have young people. So it's a lot of change. They're still dealing with a lot of uncertainty. As you all have seen, kind of dealing with schools from other ends, is that month to month or quarter to quarter, no one's quite sure, are they going to be there? Are they going to virtual? Are they hybriding? And those things are constantly in flux. Then for the children that have already gone to school, that they're used to that in-school experience, which is not going to be the same with virtual. And then just the fact that their schedules are so different. And for some of these children, depending on who was in their neighborhood, if they're in a bubble or anything together, that was their social time. So they've lost a lot of the time where they've been able to interact with similar age peers. And since young people, especially when you look at younger children, so teenagers have a pretty good sense of time, but like those younger children, I'm sure if you have kids, you know how sometimes 10 minutes for them seems like literally forever. So when they left school, and a lot of these children went home to virtually learn in the spring, when they left, they had no idea that they wouldn't see their friends or their favorite teacher for so long. And for a lot of them, they don't know when they'll see it. And for us, we still as adults have some sense of time. But these younger people, they just don't. So there's also that stress of not being able to spend as much time with their friends. They're not doing those play dates they used to do. They're dealing with learning different ways. And all children are not going to necessarily thrive in virtual learning. That may not be the ideal modality for them. And then just dealing with the stress of there is a pandemic, so children do have some sense that something's wrong, and you have to explain to them wearing masks so they know there's something out there they can catch. So there's fear around that also.
Now, this is more of a question for myself because I do actually have a 2-year-old son. And, one of the things that my wife and I have noticed since the lockdown has really been not a complete halt in his progression, but it's definitely been a slower progression than what we would have imagined he would have experienced had he have been around friends and had the social interaction and that element. Have you noticed anything as far as development in young kids, and kind of that pace at which they normally progress? Is that, in your experience, slowed down at all? And if so, what are some things that parents can do at home to really keep their kids engaged, whether they're doing hybrid type learning, where they're in, at home, half the day and then maybe in class half the day, or maybe it's all remote for the time being? What are some things that parents can do to really keep their kids engaged and continuing on that development track?
Well, and I think you bring up a huge point, because there are a lot of dynamics here, because you have families where either the work responsibilities are so high, or they're still working outside the home, where you have people making this decision of whether or not, especially for these younger kids, if these little munchkins that would normally be in daycare or Montessori are going to be home, where there are some that are home because there is no other option. There's some that are out because their parents still have to work and there's no other home childcare. But I do think one of the things that is challenging is, just as parents are around to be parents. Parents were not specifically educated on how to be substitute Montessori daycare. It's just a very different role. And I think one of the biggest challenges really is from the social aspect, that there is typically a significant social construct that comes with daycare, Montessori, preschool, and those kinds of things, which are not necessarily the same. And right now, even if you're home with your children, the average adult, it's not like they're home and their singular focus for the entire day is just working on their child's development. The average adult is still they're either working from home or trying to find another job because they lost their job. So it's just a little bit different than when you have trained personnel that their only thing is to work with your child and your child's development. So I think the challenge is really trying to find what are some educational or developmental activities you can do at home. What are some ways to still have significant social interactions with them? Even if, like, for 2-year-olds, it's a little bit more complicated as far as like doing some virtual play dates and those kinds of things. But it's still kind of figuring out ways to still keep them engaged, to still do things with them, not necessarily get tired and just park them in front of the TV all day, or with with different devices and find ways to in real time still interact with them. And one of the things I tell people is there have been people that have been doing this home-based learning and things like that for years, and instead of trying to reinvent every single wheel, we have the internet. I don't tell my age, but I assume we all are at least of a certain age that we remember when there was no internet, when the only way you're going to find something is go through the card catalog and grab a book. And right now, there's so much information out here. This is one of those times social media comes in handy. There are a lot of social media groups that are, parents that have been homeschooling or doing developmental things at home, that you can tap into these resources that people have already done this when this is your first time. So I'd say one of the biggest things is continue to stay engaged with your children and look for new things to do with them so that they're not necessarily bored, but they're also significantly stimulated.
Right. Yeah. And speaking of technology and kind of the changes that we've all been really kind of propelled into, like it or not, how has technology really changed the way that children interact with their friends and families? And I actually just had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine the other day who sat down with an old video game developer, and they were talking about the shifts and just technology with video games. As when I was a kid, I mean, I'm 31 now, but when I was younger, the video games were around like 20,000 or so pixels, I think is the way that they would describe the quality of the video games. Whereas now a lot of the games that are developed with Xbox and the new PlayStations are somewhere around 128 million pixels. And just the changes that we've seen over just a short period of time really draws kids in. And when you're in a home-based environment for a lot of the day, whether it's that hybrid schedule or you're just learning all from home, are there concerns with the technology that kids are having access to on a daily basis? And what are how is that affecting their social skills and their interactions with friends and family?
Well, I think this is kind of exploiting something that was a potential weakness that was there before, because as you're mentioning games with those pixels, when I was young, the game that came out was Pong. And it was that one line that went up, and it's just very, very different. And I think it just brings to light the importance of, number one is I'm a big fan of monitoring children's screen time. I'm not a huge fan of children going off, being on tablets and computers and video games unmonitored all the time, because there are so many different components to them, especially with how they've done video games now. Because when we were doing video games when we were younger, you weren't chatting on a video game. The only person you were playing with the video game with was whoever was in the room with you, because there wasn't an internet. So now they're connecting people. So on one hand, you want your child to still learn critical thinking skills, to have social skills, know how to actually interact with people, and have tactile experiences and other things other than everything is revolving around a screen anyway. I know it's difficult in this environment because children typically are significantly more homebound than they were before. You've lost a lot of the activities that they were doing due to social distancing. And it's just such a new world, and even going outside is just a little bit different than it was before. And then you add that a lot of times, as we were talking about before, parents may be working from home at the same time, or there are multiple people virtual learning and they can't be with one child all the time, is that there is a temptation for kids to have more screen time. It translates similarly to, it still happens now, but especially when a lot of us were younger, was instead of it being video games, people spent time with the TV. And I think it's important to not let all these things that they can do on a screen become surrogates for how to use time. I think it's important to still seek out activities that use their imagination. I'm a big fan of reading. Just have a variety of activities, from them helping you cook or prep meals, just a lot of things rather than be screen-based. Number one, all of that blue light can be overstimulating and impact their sleep. But also there's just so much there, because we started this conversation off talking about video games. But if you look at what are these young people doing on their screens, it's everything from YouTube to watching other kinds of videos to social media. It's just a lot of information. So beyond just the fact of they need social skills and how to interact with people real time, that's not texting shorthand and just single-handedly destroying the English language, which is a whole nother tangent about how people don't know how to make full sentences with full words anymore, is that it's important because you just don't want them to have unlimited exposure to too much information and be overstimulated, because there's just so much information on the web. Now, the one flip side, and I realize I've been talking literally forever, is that for some of the video games, when they have headsets, that one of the things I've noticed is some of the boys don't feel as socially isolated, just because that particular activity, just girls still do it, but it is significantly more boys than girls, is that some of them don't feel as socially isolated because when they're gaming, they're hanging out with their friends, they're having conversations, they're talking to their friends. So they're still hanging out with their friends like they would before. And the thing that's interesting for people that have girls and boys, or one child that does video games and one that does not, is that it's a lot more intentional to help the other ones still have pure interactions, while the ones that play games, especially the ones with headsets, they're still chatting and hanging out with their friends because they do it over the game.
I mean, and you mentioned screen time and limiting that. And, for some parents that, like you mentioned earlier, that might not be at home, what type of tips or, I guess, structure could you offer to them as maybe a guideline for what is an appropriate amount of screen time, and how would they potentially limit that screen time for kids if they do have to leave the house and work, in an office or be out in the field, for instance?
Well, the great thing is with a lot of social media devices, you can really, there are so many back end ways to know what someone is doing, which is excellent, because then I'm a big fan of, it's probably because of how I grew up, is my mother said nothing's private and nothing was mine if it's in her house. So I probably also subscribe to that, children and young people need to be monitored. But some of the main tips is, I realize it's a little bit more complicated when you aren't home and they're home. But one way to help deal with things when they're home and you're not home is giving them other tasks or other things to do. So it's virtually limiting their free time. Like, kids need a schedule. So one of the things that I think is helpful regardless is to actually have a schedule and schedule in everything, kind of like you would do if you were a busy business person. It helps draw boundaries. It also helps people have some level of certainty, because things become predictable because you have a schedule. And then you start scheduling in, when is the screen time? When should they actually be reading a book or playing a game, and when their meals are, kind of what's going on for the day, when is family time. And I think that's the other thing, is there are ways to occupy your children where you're actually engaging with them. It ends up making for more rewarding experience. And one of the things I think is important right now is to make memories together, so this doesn't become like it's the lost year and nothing good happened this year. We can still have quality time and make positive memories. But the short version is I think it's important to have a schedule. The next thing is, it's important to have limits, to not say, oh, just get on it whenever for whatever. It's maybe you do an hour here, an hour there, instead of it just being, well, anytime we aren't doing something together, you can be on this game, you can be on whatever it is, just religiously. So I think it's important to start by setting some limits. I'm a fan of about an hour. So sometimes it gets a little longer, but the other thing is just kind of having an idea of what your children are doing. Most of the cell phones now, you can pull out almost, at least with their cell phones and tablets, and know how much screen time they've had for a week. And I think that's good to know, so you know what your baseline is, and then start working back from there. But the main thing is just not having all of this unsupervised time, because there's so much information out there. There's so much going on in the world right now. And just think of how it is as an adult when you're even looking down your social media feed and all this stuff is coming in, from what's gone on with racial injustice to what's going on with COVID to elections to everything, and how much discernment it takes as an adult to figure out what is appropriate information, what is fact-based information, or just what is it going to make you emotionally overloaded. So by people being totally unsupervised, it's very easy for them to become overstimulated because there's just so much information out there, and some of it, quite frankly, is just not appropriate for children.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this question. I have several friends who have small children. They're at home. These are very competent parents. These are very involved parents. They're doing many of the things that you're talking about. But what they're seeing with their children, in some cases, is very, very bright, straight A children in real school, in traditional school, let me say that, are now really struggling in this virtual environment. They've gone from being A's and B's to being C's and D's and some F's. And their parents are just really struggling with helping them to be able to comprehend the information that they comprehended so well in a live classroom virtually. I mean, any tips you got on that? Because I've heard that from several parents, that they've seen their kids' grades decline, and they are involved and they are doing what they're supposed to do, but they're just not comprehending the information like they did before.
Well, you're bringing up a humongous point, Bart, which is that virtual school is not for everyone. And being honest, the way we're doing virtual schooling is still different than the curriculum they would do in traditional homeschooling. So it's a very, very different environment. And the other thing is, all this stuff is not happening in a vacuum. So these children are still trying to deal with emotionally regulating themselves in this new environment that can change so frequently while managing doing virtual school. And especially depending on how a child learns, that this may not play to what their strengths are. And also, sitting in front of a computer for hours on end, some children just aren't going to do well with it because it's difficult. As adults, most of us don't like doing it, but we do because we know we have to. But it's just hard. And so I think some of it deals with learning styles. Another is some of these children are really aching for the social component of in-person school that just isn't the same in this virtual learning environment. It's just very different. And the other thing is that, quite frankly, and I've talked to a lot of parents, it's when their kids are virtual schooling, especially these younger kids, it's like they're being held hostage too. Because they have to sit there with the kid. It's just stressful. So I think part of it is on one hand, it's the learning how a child learns. It's just very different getting it this way. Then they're missing that social component. And then, just the stress of kind of managing it because it's a lot going on. There are times, especially if you have families, you have multiple children, that everyone's just trying to figure out where their spot is, because a lot of people's homes, there are people that are in higher socioeconomic statuses that may have multiple children. Everyone has their own room. They have enough computers for everyone to have their own computer. Everyone has good internet access, but there are a lot of families that's not the case. So also, instead of being 3 kids and a mom all at the kitchen table with laptops out, 3 are in different classrooms, and the parents trying to watch them and work. So it's just a different immersive experience. And then for some of the kids, that they're just emotionally dysregulated because everything just feels so foreign or difficult. So I'd say the first tip is to be patient and have grace for yourself as the adult, and grace for your child, that they're trying to learn something new. Especially if they're not like a kindergartner, then they have learned that school happens a certain type of way and they're used to school being that way. So adjusting to this new way is very different. And it's also giving grace to the teachers because most of them never taught in this format. So it's a learning experience for them to learn how to teach effectively and keep these children engaged in this format. Because the other thing is these kids aren't getting exactly the same lessons the same way as they were getting before. So part of it is just being patient. The next is, these schools have a lot of resources, but a lot of times since people aren't going into the school, they don't have the resources. So make sure you're checking all the in better, and you can have those conversations with their teacher too, and possibly problem solve to see if there's some other ways to supplement the information in a way that they're going to actually retain it better.
Well, let me ask a follow-up on that then, and that's this: is that what are some signs or some things that they can see? That real quick, some bullet points. And what are just a few things that a parent can be on the lookout for to see if there is a significant mood change or depression occurring in their kids? Something they, maybe 2 or 3 things that they can just really be on the lookout for.
The first thing is if you have children that are now tantruming and weren't tantruming a lot, you'll also see those tantrums around kids just refusing to do school. The next thing is you have a child that previously was more interactive that now doesn't want to do anything with the family, wants to spend all their time in their room. The next, if you notice that they're not really sleeping or they're having a lot of nightmares, crying all the time. But I know a lot of people think about sadness, but also kids can get really irritable. So if you notice that this kid is just yelling a lot or they're snapping at everything, I think that's also something else huge. So it's a lot of it's just looking for changes, like changes in sleep, changes in appetite. So you just look for changes because you know who your child is. You know when your child is not acting like themselves.
How do mental health issues, and we've talked a lot about kids, and we've talked a lot about teenagers. How do these mental health issues differ between kids and adults?
Well, one of the first things is as adults, depending on your emotional intelligence, but usually adults may have better language to describe how they're feeling, is especially when you're dealing with younger kids. They may not necessarily have all the language to describe how they're feeling. So I think on that end, it's a little bit different. And the other thing is with children, a lot of times you will see even more irritability than frank sadness or the way an adult would describe anxiety. For anybody, really, any emotion can look like irritability. Sadness can look like irritability. Nervousness looks like irritability. Being mad is irritable. So, but kids are particularly prone to become irritable. So to me, that's another difference. But a lot of it just is they may not be able to talk about all the details as much, which is one of the reasons that a lot of us that see kids have done things that have to do with play, but especially for younger people and even teenagers, sometimes they're ready to tell you how they're feeling, sometimes they're not. So you have to kind of come sideways or distract them. So it's one of the reasons why a lot of times you can get some information when you color or you're playing with them or you're eating, you're doing something else, because then they're not totally focused on not telling you what's going on.
In the last couple of minutes, I'd love to kind of switch gears or shift gears just slightly. And obviously with going back to work, and a lot of us are in either a working remotely type situation or just a very different working environment. It's likely that stress is at really an all-time high for many, many people across the world, for that matter. What are some tips that you have for parents, educators, professionals going back to the workplace to really decrease that stress and continue with the same productivity that they were putting out before the pandemic?
Well, I think one of the hugest things is just as it's important for kids, it's important for adults. Have a schedule. As most of us know, I know for me, if it's not on my calendar, it may not really happen. But it's important because number one, it lets everyone in the household know exactly what's going on. It also helps you make sure that you do the things that you sometimes would let go if it wasn't written down. So you put everything on there. You put every single person in the household on there, from when everyone's in school, work, meals, exercise, if you meditate or do some type of quiet time, family time, bedtime, you're literally putting everything on there. It also makes it so that you will hopefully do those self-care things, because I think one thing that's been very obvious here is there's been such a blurring of everything that happens at home, that before, home was home for a lot of people. There are some people that work from home, but even when they work from home, everybody else wasn't home with them. That now it's just a very different environment. So it's very easy for everything to kind of blend into each other. So there's never like this time where you're done working or where you're totally focused on family. It's just everything is scattered. And I think one of the reasons it's important to have a schedule is to kind of start planning when is family time and when is work time, so that you can start having some boundaries between all of it, because otherwise people end up feeling just run down and exhausted. I think the next thing is make sure you give yourself some grace. No one is going to be perfect right now. People in general aren't at their best right now. There's just so much going on. So it's important to cut yourself some slack and cut other people some slack. All we can do is the best we can do. And a lot of times the solution that worked yesterday or last week might not even be the solution for the next week, because things are changing so quickly. Is give yourself that grace and that flexibility. I think the next thing is actually to, everyone's schedule is different, but carve at least 5 to 20 minutes where you do something that is just for you. That it's not someone else wanted to watch this TV show or do this other activity. And that's why I put it as little as 5 minutes, because if you have a busy family, you may not be able to carve lots of time, but you just want a little bit of time that is solely yours. And I know with people with busy families, because I know there are lots of people with families listening, for some people, the only place they can get a little peace of quiet is the bathroom or the closet. If you got to go there and just have a couple of minutes to yourself, because I think it's important just to be able to reset. And I'd say, if I had to say something else, and I'm trying to pick out things that you wouldn't just see on every single list, because everyone talks about drinking water and eating healthy and getting sleep. But the next thing is that during this time, because things are so changing, you're going to need to probably go sit down at the table multiple times and renegotiate what the task delineations are in your household between the adults and even the younger people, because in a lot of families, the kids are old enough to help out with some things around the house. Because one of the things we're seeing is that this is taking a huge toll, especially on women, because as the kids end up at home, then they get those tasks along with everything they were doing before, and it ends up just too much. So I think it's important, especially for couples and families, to continue to have conversations around how are we going to divvy up all these things that need to be done so there's not an unfair load on one person, so that everyone can actually still be emotionally present, because otherwise someone just ends up totally drained, and it ends up being, you'll hear these stories, and I've had patients and other people talk about it, where you have two professionals that are together, and then they have all these kids that are virtual schooling, and the mom is virtual schooling, then the mom's still trying to work, the mom's doing everything in the house, then the husband does his work on the side, and then he's working out and living his best life, going to the mountains, chilling out. So, but people have to communicate what their needs are. So I think it's really important to kind of look at that again, so that things end up a little bit more equitable.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you didn't mention that I know is big on your list, and is that, goal setting and making sure that you visualize where you want to go, and I think that's a big thing too. I think sometimes I talk to some of these people with children, and their whole world has become wrapped up in, like you said, this blurring of the lines of this time that we're going through, and they've lost sight of two things. That this is going to pass, number one, and the second thing is, what are we going to do once this passes? What are the goals we have? And I don't want to belabor this, because I know we're at the end of the show, but you have a thing. We're going to put some links on the show notes. One of the things that I really encourage people to go check out is your 5-day visualization challenge, because that's going to, I think that's such a key thing during this time, is to be able to visualize yourself on the other side of this, and not only be able to see where you're at, but visualize where you're going and where you're going to be. Because in my opinion, I think that what has happened in the past few months has stolen a lot of people's vision from them for a short time, or it's closed their vision and made it where they can't really see down the road any longer. So I just encourage people to do that. I mean, that's one thing that I really recommend, because I know you, and I know how passionate you are about this. So I'm sure that that's going to be a great program for everybody. And also to go check out your Facebook page, because I love the fact that you built your kind of brand around butterflies and metamorphosis. And that's really what I think we're going through right now. I think as a culture and society, we're going through a metamorphosis. And we're going to emerge on the other side more beautiful and stronger than we ever have been. But sometimes it's a little painful and a little ugly when you go through that. And I think that's kind of where we are. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's how I felt about things lately.
I agree. I mean, I feel like I just need to keep you in my back pocket and just pull you out periodically. But I totally agree, because this time period has become, to me, it's a period that's been marked by a lot of focus on survival.
Mm-hmm.
And when focusing on literally just surviving, it's kind of like everyone's in this perpetual crisis. And naturally, in the middle of a crisis, you're focused on how to get through the crisis. You're not necessarily focused on what happens after the crisis or anything particularly long term. You're kind of looking at, how do I survive in this moment? And I think you're bringing up a huge point, which is the one that is number one. There are some cognitive and other kinds of tools that can help people feel more grounded, utilize gratitude and other kinds of strategies, so that you can literally emotionally feel better in this season. Because as you said, we'll make it through it. It is a season. But I do think it's important to still have some level of vision or wants or desires outside of survival. I think it's a principle a lot of us use a lot of ways. I use it even in my telepsychiatry practice when I tell people the goal isn't to get you to a point where you're just surviving. It's to get you to a point where you're thriving and you're able to really enjoy your life. And I think that's one of the reasons I put together this challenge, was to put a little time and energy into thinking, what kind of things do we want for the rest of the year and through the next year, so that you have the space of not only hope, but also a space of goals, visions, desires, and things that you can still move toward. So you don't feel like all that you have is literally right in front of you.
Well, in the last couple of minutes, I know you've shared a ton of information, and I love the positive nature about the way that you respond to a lot of these questions in a very tough and challenging time. What are some things that you maybe use, whether they be tools, books you read, meditation apps you participate with, maybe it's exercise that you do, to just really help stay at the top of your game, mentally sharp, and physically prepared and ready for each day?
I'd have to say one of the things I was blessed to have when all of this started is I have lots of coaches. So I think the first thing is number one, I have not been trying to survive this season on an island by myself. So one of it is being able to ask for help and utilize resources. So I think I have a total of 4 coaches right now. So it's having all of these people that I can kind of pull through to help me figure out the best way to kind of have a mindset. And I think for me, I also did a lot of mindset work over this period. But I just decided when COVID hit, and I got, you start hearing everything. And as a physician, we're in all these groups. So you're in the inside COVID groups getting all the back end information. Is that I made a conscious choice at the very beginning that I was going to come out of this better than I went in. And actually over the first couple of months, I lost about 20 pounds because it finally clicked. I was like, I'm making a conscious decision to do this handful of things. So one was just having a mindset that I was not going to let this turn my life in another direction, that even though it's adjustments, things are different. I was doing contract work. I actually lost a bunch of contracts at the beginning. Was that I just decided, I made a decision. And the way I originally lost the weight was just eating very clean, I didn't buy any junk food. So literally there was no temptation in my house because it didn't exist in my house. And I had this Peloton that had been gathering dust. So I started riding my Peloton 5 days a week. So that Peloton has been a godsend. And then I went on the road for a while, and then gathered dust again. And when it started gathering dust again, I realized for me, staying active is very therapeutic, that then I had to start doing some other workouts. So exercise has played a huge part. Eating healthy has played a huge part. I meditate daily. I have Calm and Headspace, and they're both good, but I am totally in love with the Peloton app content, and they have they have so many great meditations, from 5 minutes to significantly longer ones. And to me, one of the things that's made it really easy, that instead of saying I'm going to meditate for 10, 20, 30 minutes, I do usually they're let me not even tell lies, 5-minute meditations, not even the 10-minute ones. I do the 5-minute meditations in the morning. If I'm having problems going to sleep, they also have sleep meditations. I'll do those. I've read the book. I've done a lot of reading. So I think the other thing is I discovered audiobooks. I'd always been like, I'm not listening to a book. It's not really reading. And I finally tried it and fell in love with it. At one point, I was going back and forth between, I'm in Atlanta and Chattanooga. And I started listening to all these books. And one of the books I listened to was Hal Elrod's The Miracle Morning. I highly recommend it. And when I listened to that, I started actually doing his Miracle Morning. So now I actually get up at 4:30 in the morning, and I do it in the morning. And it's the hallmark of it is something they call savers. So the S is for silence. So like gratitude, meditation, prayer. A is for affirmations. V is for visualizations. E is for exercise. R is for reading, and S is for scribing or journaling or writing, because none of those had an S, and he needed an S for an acronym. And I found like it just gave me so much more clarity and focus. So for me, the other end is I kind of threw myself into a lot of self-development. And the other thing is, my closest friends, we actually have a standing Zoom. So I have found ways to still stay socially connected, even though I've been rather conservative with dealing with this. My best friend lives in town. We live a couple miles away. I've only seen her maybe 4 times since March. I don't really do people right now that much, but I've just been purposeful about staying connected with people.
Yeah, I love that, because it really does come down to balance and staying active. And keeping your both mind and body active. So I think, the boredom that some people can let sit in, or the, feeling of isolation and being trapped, is really what leads to a lot of these mental health traumas.
You hit the nail on the head, because I think for a lot of people, they don't do well with the boredom or monotony. And number one, I was an only child, so I was already given the tools to deal with this, being an only. But the other is sometimes you have to find ways to do things new. And that's what I kind of encourage people to do, that you can go in your kitchen. We all have kitchen gadgets we've never used.
Yeah.
Find a way to use them. I gave myself a goal at one point that I had like an air fryer I never used. I'd never used my Instant Pot. I had all this stuff in there. And I'm like, I'm going to start using all this stuff. And then it's like, you have spices. We all end up with these random spices. The great thing about the internet is you can just say recipe with cumin or whatever. And then you cook something new, or you watch something new, or you go for a walk on a new path, or, they have these virtual tours online, all these different things. So I think part of it is, just as you said, break the monotony, try something new.
Mm-hmm. I am listening to you, and I just got to add this one last thing. Is listening to both of you go, and that exchange is, you got to unblur the lines. I think that's what you made a comment about, the lines being blurred between, you have to make a conscious effort to unblur the lines and basically build walls between sections of your life, so that when this is over, you move to that. And when that is over, you move to this. I find myself a lot of times just going back and forth and doing this like that. And all of a sudden that's just one big blurry line. But what I'm hearing you guys say is, you just got to basically make an effort to build barriers between sections of your life, so that there is some kind of regimen and is some kind of routine. I think that's great. That's great advice.
Well, in the last, kind of comments, question for both of you, is there anything that you'd like to leave our listeners with and viewers with for this week? Any words of encouragement, final thoughts, recommendations for reading material, anything along those lines?
We'll do a quick list. Recommendations for reading material. There are two that I feel like can be life-changing if you're open, because that's the other thing is everyone has these moments where you've read this book and it seems like the greatest thing, or you watched Oprah and you feel so excited and then nothing happens. So if you're ready to actually do something, and it's no judgment because I've read plenty of things and didn't actually do any kind of action, is I do highly recommend The Miracle Morning and The Miracle Equation by Hal Elrod. There's also this little booklet that's like, if a pamphlet could be gold, I think it's 36 pages. It's called The 80% Approach by Dan Sullivan. And it literally is about how to literally get rid of procrastination. And I was a master procrastinator and perfectionist. And it literally helps you get through it, because I think right now you're always trying to steal time. And the faster you can get through work stuff, the faster you can get back to your family. And I feel like that's what everyone wants to get to. You want to get to being able to spend time with your friends and your family, to have quality time with your loved ones, and some quality time with yourself, because yourself gets to be counted as a loved one. So the more efficient you are with all that other stuff, the more time you get for all the fun stuff. So those are my 3 book recommendations. I think we're all going to get through this with love, grace, and hope. So what I typically tell people is my prescription is to call at least one person that you love and tell them that you love them. You have to keep calling people till you get one person on the line. It can be audio or video. Text does not count. If they don't answer the phone, it doesn't count. And I think it's important because, number one, it's important for us to actually tell people how we feel, because no day was promised even before all this happened. But I do think it's something simple you can do that also helps get people socially engaged with people. The other last thing I would say is it's important to ask for help. If people ask you how you're doing and you say fine, people are going to assume you're fine. You have to be able to let people know that you need help so that they have permission to engage and assist you. I think Bart already mentioned that I'm on social media. You can find me at Dr. Erika. That's DoctorErika. That's where you can find me for that. And the challenge he mentioned is at visualize20.com. That's visualize20.com. And I'm just so honored to have this quality time with you all. Words can't express how happy I am to be here. You all are so gracious and doing such good work that I'm just blessed to have the opportunity.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and we'll definitely look forward to having you back in the near future. Bart, is there anything that you'd like to leave anyone with?
Can't add anything to that except for maybe just one little thing, and that is turn that television off every chance you get and go do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to both of you, Dr. Erika, Bart, thank you so much again for being on the show. We really appreciate your time. And for everyone out there viewing, this has been another episode of Friday Food Fight. We hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next Friday at 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Take care.
God bless.